They called it junk, piled it in attics, shoved it under stairs, left it rusting in barns for 60 years. They were wrong. Number 7 on this list just sold at a Midwest estate auction for $4,200, and the buyer drove 6 hours to get it. And number 3, something your great-grandmother used every single morning before sunrise, has been quietly selling on eBay for prices that would make your jaw drop. Here is the truth nobody in the antique business wants you to know. The companies that replaced these tools spent millions convincing your grandparents their old ways were primitive, and everything they owned was worthless. Hit subscribe. Let us count down the 20 Depression-era American gadgets our grandparents never threw away, now worth a fortune. Number 20, the cast iron sad iron. Before electric irons existed, your grandmother heated her sad irons directly on the wood stove. She owned 3, 1 for pressing, 2 for reheating, and rotated them every 90 seconds. A single basket of laundry could take 4 hours on a cold morning in 1931. The technique was brutally clever. 2 irons stayed hot while 1 worked the fabric. The moment an iron cooled below the threshold, she could feel it through the handle, and she swapped. She could tell the pressing temperature from the scorching temperature by holding her hand 3 inches from the plate. No thermometer. Just 40 years of doing it right. Sad irons in good condition with original detachable handles now sell for $40 to $80 each, and matching sets of 3 fetch over $200 at estate sales. The electric iron industry, led by companies like General Electric in the late 1920s, ran ads calling sad irons barbaric and dangerous. They were neither. We now know cast iron retains heat more evenly than the aluminum soles on cheap modern irons, which is exactly why professional tailors still seek them out. Your grandmother pressed every shirt your grandfather wore to every job interview he ever had. She never got credit for one. Number 19, the tin bread box. Before refrigerators became standard in the late 1940s, your grandmother kept her bread in a tin box on the counter, and it stayed fresh 5 to 7 days without a single preservative. Her loaves were made Monday and lasted through Saturday. Almost nothing was wasted. The science holds up today. Tin regulates humidity inside the box, absorbing the moisture that causes mold, while preventing the dry air that makes bread stale. She understood it not as science but as fact. Bread in tin stayed soft. Bread left out went hard. Bread in a cloth bag went green. You can still replicate this with any vintage tin bread box for under $30 at an antique mall. Wonder Bread and the commercial baking industry spent decades normalizing bread that came pre-sliced and engineered to stay soft through chemical softeners rather than proper storage. We now know those additives include ingredients that have since been restricted or banned in several European countries. A working vintage tin bread box with original paint sells for $60 to $150 today. Your grandmother bought hers for $1.25 at the Five and Dime in 1934. Number 18, the hand crank coffee grinder. Before Maxwell House convinced America that pre-ground coffee in a can was progress, your grandfather ground his own beans every morning. His wall-mounted cast iron grinder had a wooden catch drawer, and he bought green beans in 5-pound bags from the general store for a fraction of what roasted pre-ground cost. He roasted them himself in a skillet on the stove. The freshness gap is not a myth. Coffee begins losing volatile aromatic compounds within 15 minutes of grinding. Your grandfather knew this not from reading about oxidation, but because he could taste it. His morning coffee came from beans ground 60 seconds before the water touched them. Hand crank grinders from the 1920s and the 1930s, including brands like Arcade, Enterprise, and Landers, Frary & Clark, are now collectible. Wall-mounted models in working condition sell for $120 to $350. Table models go for $40 to $90. General Foods, the company behind Maxwell House, pioneered vacuum-sealed pre-ground coffee in the 1930s and marketed it as modern, convenient, and just as fresh. It was none of those things, but it was profitable. We now know pre-ground coffee loses most of its complexity within a week, which is why the specialty coffee industry, now worth $47 billion a year, has returned entirely to the model your grandfather used. He never called it artisan, he just called it coffee. Number 17, the glass butter churn. Your great-grandmother made butter twice a week in a glass-sided churn with a hand crank, and she could tell by the sound inside, the thick, wet slap of cream turning, exactly when it was done. A pound took about 25 minutes, and she knew every step by feel. The mechanism is simple. Paddles agitate cream past its whipped state and through a phase change into butterfat and buttermilk. The glass sides let her watch the color shift from white to pale yellow the moment the solids separated. She washed it in cold water 3 times and worked it with a wooden paddle to press out the buttermilk, which she used in her biscuits. Nothing wasted. Glass butter churns from the Depression era in working condition with original paddles sell for $80 to $200. Rare ceramic versions can hit $350. Lando Lakes and the commercial dairy lobby spent the 1940s and the 1950s building centralized butter production, and they succeeded entirely. We now know fresh churned butter from grass-fed cream has a flavor and nutritional profile measurably different from commodity butter, which is why artisan creameries now charge $12 for a half pound. Your great-grandmother charged nothing. She just fed her family. Number 16. The wooden icebox. Before the mechanical refrigerator took over in the late 1940s, your grandfather kept food cold in an oak-lined icebox, cooled by a block of ice, delivered twice a week. 25 pounds lasted 3 to 4 days in summer. The ICE sat up top. Cold air sank and circulated below. The thermodynamics are sound. Cold air is denser than warm air, so ice on top and food below creates natural convection. The same principle modern refrigerators use. Your grandfather paid the Iceman about $2 a week in summer. A working antique oak icebox with original zinc or tin lining now sells for $400 to over $1,000 at auction, depending on the maker. Brands like Leonard, Gurney, and Baldwin are especially sought after. General Electric, Frigidaire, and Westinghouse spent enormous sums in the 1930s and the 1940s lobbying municipalities to discontinue ice delivery and accelerate refrigerator adoption. An icebox that lasted 30 years was a problem for an industry that needed recurring sales. We now know the early environmental cost of mechanical refrigeration, including the CFC refrigerants used until the 1990s, was significant. Your grandfather's icebox had a carbon footprint of 0. He just kept the milk cold. Number 15. The tin canteen with cork stopper. American soldiers carried these home from the First World War, and your grandfather used his on every hunting and fishing trip for the next 40 years. Government-issue canteens from the 1910s and the 1920s, single-walled tin with a felt or wool wrap, were built to survive conditions that would destroy a modern plastic bottle in weeks. The wool wrap is the engineering insight most people miss. Wet wool insulates better than dry, so dipping the canteen in a stream kept the water cooler through evaporative cooling. The same principle as a clay pot cooler, a technology thousands of years old. World War I canteens in good condition, with original cork stopper and wool wrap, sell for $45 to $120. Complete kits with cups and carriers reach $250. The plastics industry, driven by DuPont and Dow after World War II, flooded the market with plastic bottles that were cheap to produce and needed replacing far more often than tin. We now know many of those early plastics leached compounds into the water, a problem that did not exist with tin. Your grandfather drank clean water from that canteen for 4 decades and never once bought a replacement. Number 14. The mechanical apple peeler and corer. Clamped to the kitchen table, your great-grandmother's apple peeler could process a full bushel, about 48 pounds, in under 2 hours, all by herself. She did this every October. The apples went into pies, sauce, dried rings hung near the stove, and apple butter that filled a dozen jars and lasted until March. The mechanism is a marvel of 19th century engineering, scaled to the kitchen. A 3-pronged fork skewers the apple. A hand crank rotates it against a curved blade that peels in a continuous spiral, and a separate blade cores as it goes. About 6 seconds per apple once you have the rhythm. Cast iron peelers from makers like Goodell, Reading, and White Mountain sell for $60 to $180 in working condition, and rare painted models reach $300. Mott's Bird's Eye and the processed food industry built their businesses in the 1950s on canned and frozen apple products that replaced home processing entirely. We now know commercial applesauce and pie filling contain added sugars, preservatives, and citric acid to stabilize color. None of those ingredients she ever used. Her apple butter tasted like October in a jar. No factory has ever come close. Number 13. The tin lard pail. Every Depression-era kitchen had one. 4-pound tin lard pails with press-fit lids and wire bail handles were everywhere from the 1880s through the 1940s, and your grandmother repurposed them for everything: storing flour, carrying lunch to the fields, and packing school lunches. The original contents, pure rendered lard, were used for pie crust, frying, even waterproofing leather boots. The cooking science is only now being rehabilitated. Lard has a higher smoke point than butter, and a fat profile similar to olive oil, with a significant share of monounsaturated fat. Your grandmother's pie crusts were flakier than anything made with vegetable shortening because lard coats flour proteins differently, creating layers rather than a uniform emulsion. The tins themselves, particularly branded examples from Armor Star, Swift, or Cudahy, sell as advertising collectibles for $25 to $90 each. Procter & Gamble introduced Crisco in 1911 and spent 4 decades replacing lard through one of the most aggressive marketing campaigns in food history, even paying home economics teachers to use it in classroom demonstrations. We now know the partially hydrogenated oil they sold as healthy contains trans fats, now banned in most countries. Your grandmother's lard was not the problem. She was told it was, and she believed them, because they paid for the science that said so. Number 12. The hand-stitched leather strop. Hanging beside your grandfather's shaving mirror was a 2-inch strip of horsehide, 18 inches long, and he used it every morning before picking up his straight razor. Stropping, drawing the blade heel to toe across the leather, away from the edge, realigns the microscopic teeth of the blade without removing metal the way a stone does. This is material science he executed perfectly without ever taking a class. A razor edge under a microscope looks like a row of teeth, shaving rolls them sideways, and a strop straightens them back. One session, 12 to 15 passes per side, restores a used edge to near shaving sharp. He stropped daily and touched his stone perhaps once a month and used the same razor for 30 years. Antique barber strops in good condition with the original hanging ring sell for $30 to $80, and matched sets with the razor in a fitted case reach $250. Gillette, built specifically on the disposable blade model, spent the first half of the 20th century engineering planned obsolescence into shaving and marketing it as hygiene, old blades unsanitary, new blades modern. We now know the biggest variable in shave quality is blade preparation, not blade newness, which is why wet shaving communities have spent 15 years rediscovering the strop. Your grandfather never threw his away. He knew better than to believe a salesman. Number 11. The glass seed storage jars. Your great-grandmother saved seeds from every garden she grew. She kept them in small glass jars with zinc lids, labeled in her own handwriting, on a root cellar shelf where temperature and humidity stayed stable. Some were varieties her own grandmother had grown. Some were 50 years old when she planted them. Seed viability and proper storage is remarkable. Tomato seeds stored dry and cool hold germination rates above 80% for 4 to 6 years. She understood this empirically. She tested a few seeds from each jar in wet cotton before planting season and replanted the strongest individuals each year, unconsciously selecting for the traits that performed best in her specific soil. Her tomatoes were adapted to her garden in a way no commercial seed ever will be. Antique seed jar collections with original handwritten labels sell for $20 to $50 per jar at estate sales. Monsanto, DeKalb, and the commercial seed industry systematically eliminated open-pollinated varieties between the 1940s and the 1990s, replacing them with proprietary hybrids that do not breed true, forcing growers to buy new seeds every season. We now know hundreds of vegetable varieties common in her garden are extinct or survive only in collections like the Seed Savers Exchange. She saved them on a cellar shelf. Nobody paid her. She just understood that food was worth protecting. Number 10. The copper wash boiler. Before electric washing machines, Your grandmother boiled laundry in a copper oval boiler on the wood stove, 30 to 40 gallons heated from cold, agitated with a wooden stick, then wrung by hand and rinsed twice. She did this every Monday from 6 in the morning until 2 in the afternoon, with military precision. Copper has natural antimicrobial properties that were not understood scientifically until the 20th century, but that she took advantage of every week. Bacteria and viruses are killed on contact with copper within minutes, a property called the oligodynamic effect. Boiling laundry in copper was, without anyone naming it, a hygiene technology that genuinely worked. Large copper wash boilers with original lids and handles sell for $120 to $300, with exceptional polished pieces reaching $500. Whirlpool, Maytag, and the appliance industry used the promise of labor savings to sell the electric washer, and it did save labor. The detergent industry, led by Procter & Gamble with Tide, which launched in 1946, replaced soap with synthetic surfactants that were cheaper and more profitable, and that we now know contribute significantly to water pollution. Your grandmother used lye soap she made herself from wood ash and rendered fat. It cost almost nothing and cleaned everything. The copper boiler outlasted 3 washing machines. Number 9. The tin spice cabinet. Mounted beside the stove, your grandmother's tin spice cabinet held 12 to 18 small labeled tins in 2 rows, and she could reach anyone without looking. The tin kept spices dry and shielded from light, the 2 primary causes of flavor loss, and each tin was refilled from bulk quantities bought at the general store. The economics are striking. She bought cinnamon in bulk for perhaps 3 cents an ounce. The same cinnamon in a branded tin cost 8 to 10 cents. The cabinet itself was often given free with purchase by companies like McCormick or Watkins to lock in customers, who then bought their spices in bulk anyway. Vintage tin wall-mount spice cabinets with original stenciling sell for $80 to $220. McCormick and the spice industry shifted entirely to individual sealed jars by the 1960s, ending bulk purchasing and tripling the per-ounce cost. We now know that model generates enormous waste. Americans throw away over 300 million spice bottles annually, and those spices are often older at purchase than what she bought fresh ground. She paid less, got fresher product, and created no plastic waste. The industry called that progress. It was not. Number 8. The hand-cranked grain mill. Your grandfather's stone grain mill was bolted to a workbench in the root cellar, and he milled his own flour from hard winter wheat bought in 50-pound sacks from a cooperative. He adjusted the grind with a simple thumb screw and milled only what he needed for the week on Saturday afternoons, so the flour was always fresh. The nutritional argument is now settled. Commercial milling removes the bran and germ to give white flour a longer shelf life being the priority of distribution, not nutrition. His stone-ground whole wheat kept both, along with the germ oils that make fresh milled flour taste entirely different from what you buy in a bag. Those oils go rancid within days, which is exactly why commercial flour removes them. Hand-cranked grain mills from the Depression era, particularly heavy cast iron models from companies like Corona, sell for $60 to $180, and stone burr models fetch $300 and more. Pillsbury, Gold Medal, and the milling industry built the modern food system on white flour's stability and lobbied successfully to make enriched white flour, with synthetic vitamins added back, the nutritional standard. We now know enrichment replaces perhaps 7 of the 20-plus nutrients milling removes. Your grandfather kept all 20. He just had to crank the handle, and he did not mind. Number 7. The tin milk carrier with wire bale. Farmers carried fresh milk from barn to house in heavy-gauge tin pails every morning for decades, and your grandfather's carrier, the tall, narrow-necked version designed to minimize splash and air exposure, did its job extraordinarily well. He filled it at the barn, carried it to the cellar, and it kept milk cool and clean for 48 hours without refrigeration in winter. The narrow neck is the key. A wide bucket exposes the full surface of milk to air, accelerating oxidation and contamination, and the narrow neck reduces that to a small circle, while the tin conducts cold from the cellar air efficiently. He understood this through observation, not food science. Antique tin milk carriers, particularly tall, narrow-necked styles with original bail handles and stamped measurements sell for $45 to $120, and early examples with dairy or farm labels command premiums. The pasteurization regulations that swept American states in the 1920s and the 1950s were genuinely protective of public health, but the infrastructure they required, including centralized processing, refrigerated transport, and packaging, destroyed small farm direct milk sales and made it illegal in most states to sell what your grandfather carried in that pail. We now know raw milk from grass-fed cows has a different microbial profile than feedlot commodity milk, and 35 states now permit its sale under varying conditions. He just called it milk and carried it in from the barn every morning at 5 for 40 years. Number 6. The reversible wool blanket. Department stores did not sell your grandmother's blankets. She bought raw fleece from a neighbor's sheep for 25 cents a pound, carded and spun it herself, or had it spun at a local mill, and wove blankets on a floor loom inherited from her own mother. A finished double-woven blanket, different colors on each face, represented perhaps 40 hours of work and lasted a century. The double-weave construction creates 2 interlocked layers that fold back to reverse, giving 2 usable sides and doubling the wear cycle. She understood textile engineering as practice, not theory, including weight per square inch, thread count, the difference between warp-faced and weft-faced surfaces, and the finishing process, fulling, that closes the weave and makes wool weatherproof. Depression-era hand-woven wool blankets with no significant moth damage sell for $150 to $450, with identified weavers reaching higher. Synthetic bedding, nylon, polyester, and acrylic captured the American bedroom between the 1950s and the 1970s, driven by DuPont's marketing of synthetics as modern and easy care. We now know synthetic textile production is one of the largest sources of microplastic pollution, with a single wash releasing hundreds of thousands of fibers into water systems. Her wool blanket releases nothing and biodegrades completely when it finally wears out, which it has not yet done. The blanket she wove in 1938 is on a bed in her granddaughter's house right now. It is still warm. Number 5. The mechanical nutcracker with pick set. Your grandfather's table-mounted nutcracker, a heavy cast-iron lever model, could crack black walnuts, hickory nuts, and butternuts that would destroy a cheap wooden cracker on the first try. He gathered nuts in September, cured them in the barn for 3 weeks, and cracked them on winter evenings while your grandmother read aloud. The meats went into cookies, bread, and the fruitcake nobody in the family actually disliked, whatever they said. Black walnuts require a cracking force of up to 50 pounds per square inch, far beyond a hand-squeezed cracker. The lever arm model multiplies force mechanically, positioning the nut in a sized cup so the shell cracks along its natural seams rather than shattering into the meat. He calibrated it by feel and hit it right 9 times out of 10. Cast iron lever nutcrackers with complete pick sets sell for $35 to $90 in working condition, and heavy commercial grade models go higher. Diamond of California and the commercial nut industry built a supply chain in the late 1950s and the 1960s that made shelled nuts available year-round and ended most home gathering, turning a free food into a product that now costs $8 to $12 a pound. We now know wild black walnuts have a more complex flavor than commercial English walnuts. Foraging communities have spent the last decade rediscovering what he gathered for free every September. The smell of black walnut on a cold evening was something his grandchildren never forgot. Number 4. The tin typecase shadow box. The newspaper office or print shop in your grandfather's town used shallow wooden trays divided into small compartments, type cases, to hold individual lead letters by frequency of use. When shops modernized to linotype in the 1920s and 1930s, thousands of hand composition cases were sold as scrap or display pieces. He bought one for $1 at a surplus sale and mounted it on the parlor wall for keepsakes, buttons, coins, and arrowheads. The system encoded in a California job case, the standard American type tray, is a masterpiece of ergonomic design. Letters are arranged not alphabetically, but by frequency. The letters E, T, A, O, and I occupy the most accessible positions. A compositor of 10 years reached for letters without looking, the way a pianist reaches for notes. Vintage California job cases with intact dividers sell for $60 to $150 as wall decor. Rare cases with type still sorted sell for more. Mergenthaler linotype, whose machines set a line of type in the time a hand compositor set 4 letters, made hand typesetting obsolete by 1920 in all but the smallest shops. The craft knowledge went with the men who carried it in their hands. We now know that everything digital typography rediscovered, kerning, leading, and baseline grids, was understood by hand compositors in 1890 and lost because the machine was faster. He hung his typecase on the wall because it was beautiful. It was also a graveyard of things nobody thought to save in time. Number 3. The glass butter mold with pineapple pattern. Every farm wife who made butter for sale or gifting pressed it into a 1-pound block with a decorative pattern on top. Your great-grandmother's glass mold, a cylindrical press with a carved wood follower stamped with a pineapple, the old American symbol of hospitality, produced a block that looked professional, that looked like a gift, that looked like something a person had cared about. The design function is purely social. Identical pounds from 2 farms could be told apart by the mold pattern, a community labeling system that required no words. Neighbors knew whose butter had the pineapple, whose had the sheaf of wheat, whose had the cow. Her butter was known in a 3-mile radius as the best available. She charged a penny more per pound and never had trouble selling it. Glass butter molds with carved wood followers in clean condition sell for $40 to $130. Rare patterns such as acorns, eagles, and strawberries go higher at specialized auctions. Land O'Lakes and the dairy cooperative movement that transformed butter production between the 1920s and the 1950s standardized packaging and eliminated individual farm branding, turning her product, which had a known maker and a personal reputation, into an undifferentiated commodity. We now know that standardization destroyed the economic power of small dairy farms, concentrating profit in the cooperatives. She pressed that pineapple into every pound because it meant something. Her name was on it, without her name being on it. When they took the mold away, they took that too. Number 2, the hand-forged hay hook. Your grandfather's hay hook, a single curve of heavy steel rod drawn to a point and fitted with a turned wooden handle, weighed perhaps 8 ounces and lasted the entire working life of every man who owned one. He used it to move bales, pull feed sacks, drag equipment, and work gates with his hands full. It was always in his back pocket, reached for 100 times a day without thinking. The metallurgy of hand-forged tools is measurably different from modern stamped or cast equivalents. Hand-forged steel is worked hot, aligning the grain structure in the direction of stress, the same direction the tool is loaded in use. A stamped hook has random grain orientation. His hook will hold 400 pounds without deforming. A modern equivalent fails at 200. He paid his blacksmith neighbor 2 bits for it in 1932. Authentic hand-forged Depression-era hay hooks with original wooden handles sell for $30 to $75 at farm auction. Sets with maker's marks go higher. The industrial tool industry, True Temper, Ames, and later Stanley, drove American blacksmiths out of business between the 1920s and the 1950s with cheaper factory tools that sold for less upfront and broke faster. We now know the loss of the working blacksmith eliminated a repair economy that kept tools in service for generations. When his factory shovel broke, he bought a new one. When the hand-forged hook bent, it was straightened for a nickel, until that shop closed in 1951 because nobody could compete with the catalog price. He kept the hook until the day he could not hold it anymore, and then he put it on the wall where he could see it from his chair. Number 1, the cast iron Dutch oven. Your grandmother owned one cast iron Dutch oven, and she used it every day of her adult life. She made bread in it, stew in it, beans in it, fried chicken in it, apple cake in it, and if she had to, she could bake a pie in it over an open fire. It weighed 12 pounds empty. It was the most valuable piece of equipment in her kitchen, and she treated it accordingly. She never put it in water, never used soap. She wiped it out, dried it over heat, and rubbed it with a thin coat of lard before putting it away, so consistently that the interior was as smooth and dark as volcanic glass. The chemistry of seasoning has been fully validated by materials science. Thin oil layers, polymerized by heat, create a cross-linked polymer surface that is genuinely non-stick, non-reactive, and more durable than any coating on a modern pan. Properly maintained, her Dutch oven will outlast every piece of cookware in your kitchen by about 100 years. A Lodge Dutch oven cast in 1928 still works exactly as well as the day it was made. Vintage cast iron from major American foundries, Griswold, Wagner, Lodge, Birmingham Stove and Range sells for $75 to $500, depending on age and maker, with rare Griswold pieces reaching over $1,000. DuPont introduced PTFE nonstick, marketed as Teflon, in the 1960s, and the cookware industry spent 6 decades convincing households that any surface requiring maintenance was obsolete. We now know PTFE begins releasing compounds above 500 degrees Fahrenheit, that damaged surfaces accelerate that release, and that the perfluoroalkyl substances used in manufacturing have contaminated water systems near production facilities across the country. Your grandmother never used Teflon. She used lard and heat and 30 years of practice. Her Dutch oven is in your mother's cabinet right now. It has never failed anyone. It never will. 20 gadgets, 20 pieces of a life that was harder than yours and smarter than you might think. They were not primitive. They were not ignorant. They understood their tools the way you understand your phone, completely, instinctively, from daily use. And when the companies came with something shinier and cheaper, they believed what they were told. Some of it was even true, but some of what they lost was irreplaceable. And the things they kept, the ones that sat in attics for 60 years and are now worth real money at estate sales, survived because somebody understood that well-made things do not stop being well-made just because a salesman says they are old-fashioned. Subscribe if you want to know what else they kept. We are just getting started.